Welcome, savvy investors. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Great to see everybody yet again. So those that are brand new to the group, I want to welcome you guys. Very exciting session. For those that don't necessarily know me, my name is Mike Ponte, and I am the founder of our group, Savvy Investor. As you guys are chiming on, make sure you just say hello to me on the comments. Always love to see who's jumping on. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about one of my favorite topics, multifamily investing. Love it. It's a great strategy. And I know a lot of people are starting to kind of get into this real estate space, and rightfully so. But, it's kind of interesting. I've been hearing a lot of people wanting to get involved and wanting to participate, but there's also a lot of kind of confusion about where to start. But I think the biggest thing I'm finding is that people are extremely nervous. So I thought this would be a really good place to kind of talk a little bit about multifamily investing, and doing this as a YouTube live, and more importantly, hopefully be able to get some of your questions answered as well, and hopefully clear out some of the concerns that maybe people might have on this as well. So to help you guys kind of engage a little bit more, I want to make sure you start to warm up those keyboards, type those questions that you want. I can see your questions in your comments, so please engage. And maybe just to kind of begin, if you guys don't mind, and to help you kind of warm up those fingers, if you haven't had the opportunity to subscribe to our channel, please do me a favor, subscribe. That would be very wonderful, as we're trying to grow our YouTube channel for sure. And secondly, is it's going to keep you guys informed of any upcoming videos that we have got planned for the next year and so on. So let's kind of get right to the topic at hand, because we got a lot to kind of cover today, and it should be very informative. So without further ado, let's kind of get into the presentation topic and talk about one of my favorite discussions as well. So great to see everybody jumping on here. Thanks for partaking live. So to kind of begin with, as I referenced earlier, multifamily is becoming a very popular place. Show of hands real quickly, who's interested in getting into multifamily this year? Just kind of post that up on the page. Love to hear about it. But there's a lot of reasons why. And that's actually a question back to the individuals that are attending live and are actually watching the recording now. Why are you guys actually here? What's the reasoning? Why are you wanting to get yourself involved in real estate or in multifamily investing? There are multiple reasons behind it. I know for me, when I started getting into the multifamily strategy years ago, it was really about scaling faster. And I found that buying lots of single family properties, it just took so much work, so much effort. And for me, I was looking for ways to kind of scale at a faster pace. One of the things I really enjoyed about it when I started to learn it many years ago was just the less impact when it comes to vacancies. Definitely, especially in the markets that I was investing in, better cash flow. And so I loved seeing all of those aspects that came along with it. Some of the things that I learned, and this could be the reason why many of you guys are watching and are interested in this, is the ability to create forced appreciation. And that can be a fantastic aspect when it comes to the multifamily world. So lots of different reasons. Another one for me, and maybe for some of us, maybe not wanting to admit it, but for me, it's a little bit of an ego thing too, is I wanted to have that feeling of, I own this whole building. Yeah, right. And that kind of excitement that I've got the entire building. And then secondly, or probably the last piece, is sometimes you guys are just a little bit bored. You know what? I've been doing the single family thing for a long period of time. I want to learn something a little bit different. I want to try this whole multifamily thing. A lot of people are referencing this on social media these days, and they're killing it. And they're like, hey, I want to do a little bit of something like that too. So multiple reasons of why people are getting into the multifamily space, and get it. Here's the problem. There's this perception that single family and the strategies in single family work in the multifamily side. And that's not necessarily true. Okay. So if there's a message that you guys get today, is they are two very distinct and very different investment strategies. For some, the perception is bigger is always better. And that is actually true in some cases, because you're seeing that instead of buying 15 or 20 properties, single family homes, you've got a building maybe of 20 units. You got one roof to contend with. You've got one boiler to contend with. So the economies of scale can work exceptionally well. So even the principles of the business, being tenants and managing tenants and dealing with tenants, can be the same. the way the business is actually conducted is very, very different. So when you think about, when I reference this, and this is the message that needs to be very clear, is residential real estate is really compared with residential real estate. And so you can't really bring residential real estate and the strategies that are referenced there into the multifamily world. So you got to think a little bit different. When you look at residential real estate, I want you to kind of look at it as comparing a house to a business, and this coffee shop as an example. Okay, so an apartment building has much more similarities than to a coffee shop than an actual single family home, believe it or not. Okay, and the reason for that is the way that the business is actually valuated. And so it is really based on something called net operating income in regards to justifying the value of this apartment building. So when you're comparing kind of a residential property versus a residential property, you'll get your realtors. Mr. Realtor, can you just provide me some comparables of similar properties in the area and just kind of look at the average price? Oh, one property's got some more renovations than another, so it's worth an extra $10,000, $15,000 more here and there. Perfect. That's how you would normally kind of do a comparable with a single family home. The problem with multifamily is you might have two buildings, literally exactly the same buildings next to each other. And they're actually built same age by the same builder many years ago. But one is worth significantly more than the other because one is performing better than the other. And so this is where some of the big differences really apply with the multifamily side of things. And this is what we're going to be talking a lot about today. And this is where hopefully you guys will have a better idea. If you guys are looking to get into this space, the intent is to really open your mind, open your horizon, that you need to look at this investment strategy different. It can be a fantastic strategy. It really can. But there are three things that you need to take into consideration when you are looking at a multifamily property. Number one, you got to buy right. Okay. So again, you got to buy right. Secondly, you got to finance it right. So by buying it right, financing it right, and the most important piece, and it should be number one, is you've got to be managing it right to be successful in this strategy. And if you do those types of things, buy it right, finance it right, and manage it right, it can actually be one of the lowest risk investments that are out there, believe it or not. Okay. It is one of the most proven investment strategies really against inflation during recessionary times, because it is actually the lowest common denominator in the rental industry during those particular periods of time. So if you really think about it, when there is times of turbulence, and we've all seen this in the last couple of years, people have lost their jobs, their businesses, and all sorts of things. And it's really unfortunate. And people have had to consider that, you know what, I've got to start to downsize because I can no longer afford to rent this house or buy this or own this house. So what happens is they tend to scale down. They tend to, instead of owning a house or renting a house, they'll maybe move to the next area, which is a townhouse. From there, they're just like, you know what, I can't necessarily afford a townhouse. So I maybe be able to downsize further to maybe a 2-bedroom apartment or a condo of some sort. But that's the beautiful thing about apartment buildings, is because in apartment buildings, you can get, a 3-bedroom unit, you can get a 2-bedroom unit, you can get a 1-bedroom unit, and you can get a bachelor unit. They tend to attract the lowest common denominator. And it's not that the quality of tenants are lower. It's just that during challenging times, the more affordable properties to rent are actually in the apartment building sector. And the best part about it is because you've got 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms and bachelors in the same building, you can accommodate many different types of renters within the building. And it happens when people are actually stuck or they can't afford a property anymore, or a rental. Let's say it's a 3-bedroom. Within the same building, say a 2-bedroom becomes available. Maybe they're just going to cross the street in the hallway and be able to rent that 2-bedroom. So you've got some really good opportunity within the building in itself, where if people are struggling, they can literally move within the same building. And especially if you've got some great quality tenants. So it is, again, the lowest common denominator when it comes to challenging times. So if you look at what's been happening over with COVID, I think there's been some challenging times for some people, right? And so this is why demand for multifamily has been going up. So to kind of show you a little bit of proof, I thought I'd kind of provide you with a couple of articles just to kind of give you some insight about what's been happening over the last couple of years. I'm sure a lot of people, when COVID actually hit, they're like, man, there's a lot of uncertainty here. I don't really know what's going to happen. Is interest rates going to go up? Am I still going to keep my tenants? How are they able to afford rent? And I know for myself, lots of questions, lots. Never seen anything like that in ever. And so for us, we were playing kind of that safety approach to this whole thing. And very similar to our company taking a safety approach, very heavily invested in the multifamily sector. You're seeing other companies and financial institutions doing exactly the same thing. And so here's an example of kind of just, here we are, we're seeing lenders being much more attracted to focusing on more industrial, more warehouse, and also multifamily. They're starting to shy away from retail. Rightfully so, because you know what? If these stores are closing down and everybody's starting to order online, then there's probably some risks. Banks don't like risks. I don't know if anybody knows that, but they don't. They like security. They want to protect their investments. They want to protect their money. I think everybody wants to protect their money. And so, the reality is you see these types of financial institutions getting into the multifamily sector for a reason, and they're looking for a safe haven to place. Here's another one. Canadian pension funds. And so you're saw a lot of this during the recessionary period. They're all jumping into the real estate sector, and most of it is actually in both warehouse, and secondly, it was mostly in the multifamily side as well. As the old saying goes, and many people have heard this, follow the money, follow the money. Where's the money going? So when you see these big conglomerates and these big companies getting themselves involved out there and seeing these financial institutions getting into the multifamily reason, there's a reason for that. And the biggest thing that they're looking at is safety, especially during uncertainty. And so again, people are always going to need a place to live, even during challenging times. So with that being said, when you're dealing with the apartment building sector or in the multifamily side of things, it's an appeal because it is the lowest common denominator when it comes to affordability. And that's really why there's a lot of appeal, especially during this time. And I'm not sure a lot of people are hearing this right now. Is affordability a hot topic in Canada? I think so, especially in Toronto and in Vancouver. It's literally in the news every single day. So with that being said, it becomes even much more of an appeal in regards to the multifamily side because the demand starts to go up. But when they reference multifamily, there are differences. And so there are two different types of multifamily that we're going to kind of highlight and discuss. And so I want to be really clear, one is different than the other. And the way you may be coming into this session tonight and paying attention, you may be thinking of multifamily in one way versus another. So there are two different types. One of them is more of the residential multifamily sector. Some of you may be invested in this, and there's nothing wrong with this, but it's kind of anything that exceeds more than one unit. So if you've got 2 unit up to 4, okay, so that means multifamily, meaning multi-units. There's 2 to 4 units. Okay, so this is kind of the residential multifamily world. Okay, this is not true commercial multifamily, like bigger apartment buildings at all. It still falls under the residential umbrella. Okay. With that being said, when you are getting financing, more often than not, you are still going to get residential financing, and you should, because it's so much cheaper, less expense, better interest rates for sure. And so when you're looking at that, it can provide a huge opportunity when you're getting into these type of sectors where you can get really good cash flow still, but at the end of the day, it still falls under the residential world. So when you are doing this type of residential multifamily, I want to be very clear with this. You should be comparing your prices with other 4plexes or 3plexes or 2plexes in the area, because that's the way it should be evaluated. No different than what you would do with your single family home. So when you're asking your realtor to pull your comparables for what the average comparables are for townhouses in this particular area, the same thing should actually be applied here. The banks look at it in that type of fashion. When they're looking at it, they're like, okay, this is what the average prices are. That's what the value of this building is. But sellers really like to spin this category of residential multifamily as if it was more of a multifamily commercial property. But to be correct, it is not. It is still falling under the residential world. And what happens is if sellers try to spin it that way, more often than not, you tend to overpay for these types of properties. So just be really, really careful when you're kind of looking at these properties. They can be fantastic investments. They really can, but they should be compared through as a comparable valuation approach. That means looking at comparables and not an income valuation approach. And so when I say income valuation approach, it's not based on net operating income. So just be very clear. And so with that being said, they can be great investments. They don't require commercial financing in this whatsoever. They can get fantastic residential rates, absolutely. And the bigger part is you just don't have to incur a lot of the expenses, which you guys are going to see very soon in this type of segment than you will in some of the bigger projects as well. But I know for myself, I got a lot of properties in the residential multifamily quadrant like this, where it's 4 units and less, and they can actually perform exceptionally well for sure. When you're getting into this, again, it's a great place to start, because at the end of the day, you can kind of start to understand the nuances of multiple tenants in a building. And trust me, there are nuances that come along with this, and dealing with up and down tenants. And so it's good to kind of get your toes in the water getting into the multifamily in this type of investment strategy, but it is very different than the commercial side of things. Okay, so this is residential multifamily, and this is falling under 4 units or less, still falls under the residential world. Now let's kind of get to the topic, which we're going to be spending a lot more time talking about, is more on the commercial world, okay, commercial residential multifamily. And so there are a lot of different areas that you can play in this. So when I reference the definition of commercial, what is commercial real estate investing? It is normally 6 units or more. Some of the areas that it falls under, you would see residential multifamily, again, 6 units or more. Commercial, like be it businesses or strip malls. I'm sure you guys have all seen that kind of stuff. Industrial warehouses, even vacant land can actually fall in this as well. So kind of the definition is, if there's a business entity that's associated with this, then it's technically falling under the commercial world and is requiring a business license. And for those of you that don't know, multifamily requires a business license. And so we talked about this before. It is a business. So you got to treat it as that. And you do need a business license to operate a multifamily property. Okay. So with that being said, there are lots of different areas that kind of fall under this category under commercial financing. But you may be looking at this and say, Mike, you know what? You referenced 4 units or less under the residential multifamily, and then you've got 6 units or more in the commercial multifamily. There's a gap. What's happening with the 5 unit? I've got a 5 unit that I'm trying to fit in, and where's that going to work? And so that's actually quite an interesting one. So for those of you that have got like a 5 unit, and in some cases even up to a 6 unit, that can still fall under residential. But here's the problem. Not all banks accept residential multifamily after 4. Okay. And then to add insult to injury, sometimes when you try to get commercial financing for that, they kind of consider it as too small, and they don't want to do it either. So you kind of have this little bit of a vortex that's going on in the number 5 unit, and in some cases even 6 units, that they don't want to get financing is not available from the residential side or even on the commercial side. So just be aware of that. If you're looking at those types of properties, you can always find financing. You just may not need to get some creative financing. So it might be some private lending. Maybe it's a bead lender. There are banks that do finance that. I know RBC has been a little bit very pro. So just be aware of that. So if you come to that situation, just understand, as soon as you get in kind of a 5 unit building, it becomes a little bit more challenging. So just be prepared with that, and just making sure that you have some clarity to that. Okay. So with that being said, the definition of commercial and then the residential side of things, they can be similar, but also they're extremely different. And so with that being said, you're dealing with the same type of tenants. You're dealing with tenants, you are collecting rents, you're doing all of those types of things. But in the residential world, you may be able to improve the property, the look in regards to some new shrubbery, maybe repainting of the exterior and even in the interior, and you're doing all this stuff, maybe doing some landscaping, and it all looks amazing, and you're increasing the value based on that. But under the commercial world, doing all that stuff, it's great. I'm sure it looks amazing and it'll look fantastic. But if it's not generating more income, then really it has not increased any value whatsoever on the property itself. So be really, really aware. If you are going to be putting money into the project, you got to look at opportunities where you're going to be able to get that money back out by finding ways to increase this thing called net operating income. I promise you, I'm going to get to this shortly. So, okay. So what you're trying to determine is, if I'm putting this renovation, I'm putting some of this money in to improve the overall property, what am I able to do to increase the value? Is this going to get me higher rents? Is this going to provide me with lower expenses? And by looking at that, so you'll know for every single dollar you're putting in, you're looking for opportunities to be able to get that money back when it comes to potential refinance. So you got to be paying very close attention when you're doing this with multifamily. So just like any investment strategy, there is always pros and there's always cons. So let's start off with the pros. So on the positive side, to begin with, and one of my favorites is cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. I don't know if anybody else likes cash flow. I love cash flow. To me, it's one of my favorites, and I love cash flow every single month. And depending on the different markets, it can produce a lot. And if it's done exceptionally well, it can be absolutely amazing. And the nice thing about the apartment buildings or multifamilies, there can be multiple different streams out of the same building. So different types of income strategies or different incomes that you can actually get from there. Obviously, rent, number one. Secondly, you can get a laundry room where it's coin operated, where you can do coin operated laundry. Third, parking. You can rent your parking space or a garage that may be out there, or even a storage unit. And there's lots of storage units within the apartment buildings as well that you can absolutely rent. Bike parking, even vending. If you've got a big enough building and you've got a vending machine with chocolates and gum and chips and all that stuff like that, that all kind of comes in, and you're looking to try to find different sources of income as much as you possibly can to increase the value of the property. And that is the goal. That is the objective here. Okay. So the other thing that you like to look at is multiple tenants don't necessarily impact you as much when it comes to vacancies. So they're not as crucial. So when you've got a house that you are renting that becomes vacant, you are 100% vacant. If you've got a 10-unit apartment building and you've got one vacancy, you are 10% vacant. So you're not sweating it as much versus your house that has one vacancy and really you've got no money coming in. So again, lots of real great pros that come along with this. There's so many great things that come with multifamily, especially when it comes to possible appreciation. There is appreciation based on the market. So just like anything, if the market is starting to really lift, you can get appreciation based on the market. You can also get rent increases and finding ways to reduce expenses. And again, net operating income, you're going to see NOI quite a bit. Okay. More stability than even in some of the residential side of things as well. Again, like we talked about, lowest common denominator. With that, there's a lot of great things when it comes to the multifamily side too, is there's also less competition. So because a lot of people are not familiar with that strategy and they don't necessarily have the capital to participate in that, then you don't tend to not deal with as many competitors, but at the same time, there's not as much inventory as well. And I know for those of you that have been doing this for a long time, that you guys can probably understand that, hey, you know what? There's not a lot of inventory right now. It's really hard to find deals. And that has been true as of late. So with that being said, there is definitely a lot lower risk that comes from the multifamily side. Financing, you can get some amazing amortization and also interest rates. Believe it or not, you can actually still get 40-year amortizations in the multifamily world. Who likes that? I love that. It's always great. You can actually diversify your product as well. So when we talk about multifamily, we've talked about tenants, but it doesn't have to be just any type of tenant. It could be student housing. It could be senior living. It can be Airbnb, short-term rentals. You can take advantage of a lot of these different segments and diversify your product. So it can be a really fantastic way to look at different strategies within your building in itself that you can really take advantage of. Okay. So there is a lot of great things to love about the multifamily investing world. And as there are always pros, there are always cons. So we do need to understand that part. So let's maybe make sure that we understand that too, because there are risks that come along with it. I'm not going to lie. Trial and error can be extremely costly for sure. So if you guys are getting in there and you haven't taken the time to get some knowledge, it can be very, very painful. In the residential world, you know what? You can make some small mistakes and it's probably going to hurt. It's going to hurt. Just be really cognizant that when you think about a bigger building with multiple units, those mistakes can be extremely costly. So be really, really careful. Take the time to learn about this strategy, which is why you guys are here today, is to learn more. Okay. Secondly, you need the money. You need lots of money. A multifamily requires a lot of capital, especially when you're going for down payments, reserve funds, any renovations that are going to kind of come along with this, any types of big expenses, which I'll get to in a second here, but there can be, you do need a lot of capital to get into this game. So if you've got like 10, 15, $20,000 and you're trying to buy multifamily yourself on your own, it's going to be really tough, to be really honest with you, without working with somebody else on this situation. So have a capital raising strategy before you kind of go in. So hopefully you've got enough capital to go in, but if you don't, you're going to need more capital to facilitate that. Limited inventory, for sure. You know, in some cases, they haven't built a lot of multifamily properties in a very, very long time. So the inventory amount is very, very little. And more often than not, you've got one or several landlords that own multiple buildings. And we'll talk about networking and building relationships, but it's extremely important to have those contacts, because sometimes these landlords like to keep these buildings for a very, very long time and not get rid of them. So very, very limited inventory. The other thing that is not really talked about very often, and it is an important piece for everybody to understand, is when you're buying a single family home, there's nothing wrong with this, but you're actually still kind of dealing with kind of a mom and pop owner. And it's not an insult by any means. They may not have a lot of experience in selling homes or buying homes, because they may have bought and sold maybe 1 or 2 or 3 properties in their lives. But when you're dealing with more of the apartment building sector, you are actually dealing with another investor. And more often than not, they do have experience and they do have knowledge. And so for you as a buyer, without that same type of level of sophistication, you can get hurt. So it's really, really important that you got to know that the individuals that you are dealing with are other sophisticated investors. So if you've got a sophisticated investor where their knowledge is here and your knowledge is kind of here, it can be a little bit of an advantage from the seller side of things. So your goal is to try to get your knowledge to the same level, so you guys are all in the same level playing field, or even better yet, take the time to learn a little bit to elevate your education a little bit more, so you can talk to them at a different level. So it's important to understand you are dealing with more sophisticated investors out there. So be very cognizant, especially when you're dealing with sellers. Okay. Due diligence is extremely crucial. And when you look at the process of due diligence, it's really about understanding the numbers of the performance of the business. Is this business performing well? Yes or no? So you got to take the time to scrub the numbers to making sure that you are buying a good business, and nothing is not turned over. So you got to look at like utility bills. Is the rent accurate? You know, am I able to get the rent increases up? Is the seller trying to hide anything? So you got to be really proficient in understanding and looking at doing your due diligence on the property itself, the area, and making sure that this investment that you were hoping to buy, it matches exactly what you were hoping for. So you want to make sure that everything's matching what the seller had promised in their pro forma. Okay. The other thing that you got to take into account is it can be a very long sales process. So in the residential world, you know what, get an offer accepted, 2 weeks later, you get your financing done, you got an inspection done, and you close probably in another 2 weeks after. So you can probably get things wrapped up in about a month. Multifamily, not so much. It takes a little bit longer to obviously do some of these things. So just be aware, just to get all the reports. So there's going to be several things. We'll talk about that in a second. Your engineering report, environmental report, your appraisal, minimum 30 days, somewhere in that vicinity. Financing is the biggest challenge. And again, be very aware of this. We're actually going to be doing another presentation specifically on commercial financing here in a couple of weeks. But the reality is it does take time. So you want to budget somewhere in the area of around 45 to 60 days. And if you're getting CMHC insurance, get ready for the long haul. It could be even longer than that. So just be aware of this. So in a lot of cases, you want to be budgeting somewhere between 45 days for condition removal, or maybe up to 60 days for condition removal, and then roughly another 30 to 45 days to actually close. So you're probably somewhere in the area of around 60 to 90 days from offer acceptance to closing. So just be aware of this. I've seen a lot of investors jumping into multifamily with not a lot of experience and are treating it truly like residential, and it is very different. So just be prepared. Now, the other thing that you need to also understand, I said it requires lots of money. It requires lots of money. If there is some big expenses in the horizon, like a roof that needs to be done, 45, 50, up to $100,000, not uncommon. So just be prepared. Boilers, another 45,000. So all these things start to add up. Again, there are huge advantages to having multiple units in one building, but there can be some significant cost because there's multiple units in one building. So be prepared for this type of thing. Okay. So understand that there are some significant costs that kind of come along with this when it comes to acquisition. Definitely a lot of things to maintenance. So you want to make sure that you have good reserves for sure when it comes in this type of area. Okay. The other thing that you want to look at too is if you're dealing with a smaller market, or I should say multifamily is a smaller market, and everybody tends to know each other. And so you can probably you can go online and just Google realtor in Calgary, and there'll be millions of them and lots of different realtors out there. But when you start to Google commercial realtor in Calgary, that number is going to shrink drastically. So reputation is extremely key. Everybody knows each other in the industry. So it's really, really important you have really good relationships and you have a good reputation out there. So the key is don't start burning your bridges, because it becomes very, very difficult because everybody talks. So just be aware of that and just know that. Okay. There was one more thing I wanted to talk about is competition. As there is very little inventory out there, you can be dealing with a little bit more competition. So for a lot of the people that you're competing with are sometimes a lot of these newbies that are just getting started. And that may be many of you guys today. And this is not a knock, but at the same time, you may be competing with a lot of people that are just getting into this market and they're looking at properties kind of 9 units or less. And the reality is these individuals may or may not know what they're doing, but you got to be really careful when you're competing with these individuals, with newbies that don't have a lot of experience or knowledge. They can be really overpaying for some of the prices that are in the multifamily side. On the opposite side, you also may be dealing with a lot of individuals with experience. So the important part is take the time to learn. That's it. Take the time to learn so you know what's really, really important to you when you get into the strategy. So at the same time, you're not overpaying for these types of things based on individuals that are maybe spending a little bit too much money on us. And at the same time, when you're competing with experience, that you are not committing to something just because you are not knowledgeable in regards to some of the commitments that you should be putting in for conditions and stuff. Okay, so have clear systems, build good relationships with your investment team, but understand this is not always for the faint of heart. There's a lot of costs and things that kind of come along with this, but it's not to scare you. It's all about taking the time to learn, which is why we're here today. Okay, so with that being said, when you're looking at getting into the multifamily space, one of the things everybody should be aware of is you really do need to take the time to understand your strategy before going in. Now, this should be very similar in the residential world. Your strategy may be going into kind of more of a buy and hold, or am I going to do a burr or a flip, or what am I going to do? But in multifamily, it is extremely important because there's a lot of things to take into consideration before you actually make that commitment, because your commitment to getting your financing done, and if you've got the wrong financing in place, it can cost you a significant amount of money. So you really do need to take the time to really think about, what is my investment strategy with this property before going in. So you may be considering kind of going through kind of a burr strategy. And so when you're looking at kind of a burr strategy in a multifamily side, it can take a little bit longer because you're going to be doing suite by suite, doing the renovations. You may not want to kick all your tenants out all at one time, because if you've got a 10-unit apartment building and they're paying, $1,000 a month, well, that's a lot of money that's going out the door. You might want to kind of slowly piece that off and start to move some of those tenants off and do the renovations one suite at a time. So it makes it a little bit easier. But the turnaround time can be a little bit longer when it comes to doing that. But it is, you can do some simple renovations, but it does take a little bit of time than your standard typical burr on the residential side. Other things that you want to be looking for as part of maybe a typical strategy is, I may be wanting to do a burr and I can do some renovations and I can see the opportunity to raise some of the rents. Is your property set up right now where the rents are actually really low? Are the rents low where I can actually increase it? Can I find other opportunities to create income or additional income streams out of that property? What are some of the things I can do? Okay, maybe I can transfer some of the utilities off to the tenants. Wow, that would be fantastic. I see I can get some more energy efficient lighting and heating and really be able to take advantage of this. So I'm looking for these different ways to kind of increase income, reduce expenses, and trying to increase the net operating income. And that's the goal. And so just for everybody's knowledge, I've said this a few times, net operating income. Like, what is net operating income, for the love of God? So let me tell you what it is. So net operating income, so for those of you that are watching and maybe taking some notes, it equals your gross income. So that's everything. That is your rent. That is your parking rent. That is your storage. That is laundry income. It's a gross rent minus all of your expenses, with the exception of your mortgage. You do not include your mortgage as part of the expense. It is income. So it's all your gross income minus your expenses, property management, utilities, property taxes, insurance, all of that. So that is your net operating income. So gross income minus all your expenses, not including your mortgage, equals your net operating income. Okay, so just be aware of that. So just understand exactly that. That is the key. That's the focus. So you got to be finding ways to be creative and trying to approach this and to get that type of higher income. Now, those are a couple strategies. By increasing the net operating income, you're actually increasing the value of your apartment building. Yay. And I'll share an example with that shortly. But that is the objective. So does your building have the ability to do that? So I can maybe refinance this property and take some of that equity out. Hey, that sounds like a great strategy. Or I may be able to wanted to sell it shortly after. And so those are the things. Does your property have the ability to do this? So that may be one strategy. And maybe another more common strategy that people are willing to accept, and there's nothing wrong with this, is more of a long-term buy and hold strategy, where, you know what, it's a great property. I'm maybe not able to raise a lot of rent, but it is a solid building. It produces great cash flow, and I'm looking at this for the long term. Those types of properties really attract a lot of competition because, again, there's really not a lot that needs to be done, and you tend to deal with a lot more experienced individuals. So be prepared for that. What is your strategy going in? What am I trying to buy this for? What's the exercise? And then more importantly is, if I'm looking to kind of create this similar to a BRRRR approach on the residential side, do I have the ability to do that in regards to raising rents, reducing expenses, increasing net operating income so I can pull that capital out? Okay. So be aware of this. When you're looking at these things, you also got to take into account, you got to understand market rent controls. Is that going to possibly create an impact to you? Most likely, right? So if you've got limitations of how much you can raise rents, or even if you can create vacancy within the property itself, what is your strategy in that situation that you can offset? Okay. When it comes to the financing strategy, if you're looking to kind of create this BRRRR strategy, what are you going to do with financing? Maybe it's something that's a little bit better as private financing, or maybe a short-term financing strategy, or conventional, or working through CMHC. So which one of those makes the most sense for what your investment strategy is? So you as an investor, and especially in the multifamily world, people are going to want to treat you as more sophisticated because you're getting into this space. You do need to communicate that definitely with your financial advisor, or not your financial advisor, your mortgage broker, and because they're going to try to provide you with the right product to help facilitate that investment strategy that's there. Okay. So with that being said, what is the strategy? What are you looking for? And the important part is, what type of opportunities am I needing to look at? So let's take a look at some types of properties and where these things are. So in a lot of cases, you can find multifamily properties everywhere. You can go on MLS right now and you'll see listings galore. And they tend to be kind of a dime a dozen, to be really frank. But at the end of it, the real opportunities when it comes to multifamily are really never ever listed. So this is where it becomes really, really important to actually have really good relationships with your realtor, with your property manager, industry experts in that area. So when an opportunity becomes available, that they are going to present this to you. But the types of opportunities that you should be looking for is kind of in these types of areas. So really, you're trying to find these opportunities where there's like a little bit of diamonds in the rough, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay. So it can to be like properties that are maybe poorly managed buildings. Okay. Maybe that landlord's getting a little bit tired. They've been doing this for a really long time, and they're self-managing it. They're sick of dealing with tenants, and they just don't want to do it anymore. So they may be poorly managed. It's not that the property is necessarily run down. It's just not very better. It's just not well managed. And in that situation, people are just not, you know what, they're just not raising the rents. They're just hoping to keep the building full. They're generating good cash flow. They're fine. They don't really need to do anything. So looking at that, they're not necessarily wanting to put any money into this. And now they're like, you know what, I think I'm getting tired and maybe I'm just ready to take it back. I'm ready to get out. Those can be some really great opportunities. And you'll find a lot of these, believe it or not, tired landlords. Some of them that I'm actually seeing lately, and it's been my last two acquisitions in the last year, which has been kind of interesting, is satisfied landlords. Strange. So you have these landlords that have second generation owned properties. These properties are completely paid off, and they've had the same tenants in there for the last 18 years. I had one tenant in there for 30 years. 30 years, one tenant. Okay. And she was paying $650 a month for a 2-bedroom unit, including utilities. Think about that. Okay. The rent actually should be $1,100, not including utilities. But the point is, this satisfied landlord wasn't really worried because he was making money. The mortgage was no longer paid, but he became kind of a little bit of a lazy landlord in some cases. He didn't really think about increasing the valuation because he just wasn't considering selling it at that point in time. So he's done himself a disservice. But at the end of the day, there are those individuals that are tired landlords. They may have great buildings, but they just really have just not kept up with what the market is by increasing the rents because they didn't want to impact little Susie because the rents have been really, really low for a while. Okay. Other thing is maybe the poor landlord. And so the poor landlord, they may have got into this project, but they've not maintained it at all. They have no capital for renovations. They've not done very much maintenance. And what's happened is because the property is slowly degrading, the tenant quality has also gone downhill as well. And so the property is kind of falling apart. You're getting higher turnover, and then it's kind of more like month-to-month leases. And the reality is it's impacting impacting this property. This one we can require a lot more work and obviously more capital. But at the end of the day, these can be really great opportunities, but it does take a little bit of sweat and tears in regards to getting this back up to a place that it needs to be. But if you can get it priced at the right price, it can be an actual great home run if you're looking at it from that perspective. Okay. So again, it's really about looking at ways to try to increase the net operating income on this thing. Because if you increase the net operating income, you increase the valuation of the building. And the way this is all measured, and one of the things I promised that we're going to talk about was also cap rates. And a lot of people have heard the term cap rates, but they don't necessarily know what cap rates are. So let's kind of get into what cap rates are. So to begin with, calculating your net operating income is, again, total rent. And that means all income from the property. So it's all the gross rent minus the expenses, not including your mortgage. And so once you've done that calculation, to calculate a cap rate, it is net operating income divided by your purchase price. And that's going to give you something called a cap rate. Okay. So with that, what is a cap rate and why is this important? Because I don't necessarily know why this is important at all. And for some people, they don't believe it's important. But for me and for a lot of the banks and a lot of different investors, this is a measurement that is being compared with. So remember, we talked about residential comparables. They were looking at different properties or similar properties and trying to get an average price for those types of properties. This is what you are doing in the multifamily side, is you're trying to understand what the average cap rate is for multifamily. So to kind of give you an example, the higher the net operating income, the higher the cap rate, which means the higher the purchase price. So that's really what's reflected. So let me kind of give you a better example so you understand how this is going to work. So to calculate cap rate, I just put a simple example to kind of get a perspective, but hopefully this will open your eyes a little bit to really some of the benefits when it comes to multifamily. So let's pretend we have bought ourselves a 9-unit apartment building for $1 million. Okay. The down payment for this property, let's just say it's 30%. So we put $300,000 down on the property. The net operating income, I'm going to repeat this again and again and again. Gross income minus expenses, not including the mortgage payments, equate to $50,000. To calculate the cap rate, it is net income divided by purchase price, which gets you a cap rate of 5%. Okay, so that's what it is. Now, let's just say we are very fortunate that we're in a good rental market and we were able to raise the rent by $75 a month times 9 units. And we're now able to increase the net operating income to $58,100. Fantastic. Love it. Okay. So the new cap rate, if I use that same number, 58,100 divided by the purchase price, is actually now 5.8%. Now, based on what I'm seeing in the market is showing the average sale price is running at about a 5% cap rate. So mine's running at 5.8. So I've actually increased the value. So if I went to push this out on the market and want to sell it to kind of more market price, I would actually sell this for probably $1.162 million because the new valuation, because of the higher cap rate, has increased by $162,000. So that is a fantastic equity. And this is one of the huge advantages when it comes to multifamily is the ability to create forced appreciation. Anybody else like forced appreciation? Just share that in the comments if they like it or not. I know for me, I love this. And so this is one of the biggest advantages that it comes to multifamily is when you find yourself a great opportunity where you can increase the net operating income, increase the cap rate that's based on this, you can increase the valuation or the equity within the property in itself. So that's really one of the biggest pluses. And so this is why it's so important to be paying really, really close attention to some of the things that you can do to increase the cap rate on this particular property. Okay. So with that being said, let's kind of continue on with the cap rate side of things. So maybe just to kind of keep you guys moving and writing and get the blood flowing a little bit, what are some things that we can do to increase our net operating income, which in turn increases the cap rate? So maybe just put that in the comments. Think about it. We've talked a lot about it. What are some things that we can do? So let's think about some different income strategies. Let's maybe even think about some reduction of expense strategies as well. What are some things that we can be creative in doing to try to find ways to increase our net operating income and increasing our cap rate? Okay. So again, that's the whole objective. That's what we're trying to do. So some kind of ideas, a few ideas that I can kind of share, and I've talked a little bit about this already. Raise rents. That's the most and easiest way. Am I buying a property that there's an ability where I can raise some rents? What about maybe charging for parking if there's their ability to do that there? Vending, laundry income. Here's another one. What about charging for a charge for internet services? Oh, very funny. Kick out the old lady and raise the rents. Yeah, you can do that too. That's pretty funny. So thanks for that comment. But yes, you can do that too as well. Other things that you can do is also looking at some of the expenses, transfer of utilities back to the tenants. That's a big one if you can do that. Or if the units are not separately metered, charge them kind of a fixed charge in regards to what a utility cost would be, like $40 or $50. Okay, so start to think about some of those things. Think about some high energy efficiencies that you can kind of look at, maybe some lights, water. What are some of those things that you can get to really reduce some of those expenses? Review insurance. And believe it or not, this is becoming more of an issue. And I know for me, it's been unbelievable, but it's becoming much more of a challenge these days. So this is actually more of things to be aware of is when a seller's trying to sell you a property, whatever they're paying for insurance, more often than not, your insurance cost is going to be much higher. So always get a quote before you acquire the property because it might have a significant impact on your net operating income. So be aware of that. Okay. But the goal here is take a look at things that you can do to reduce some of your expenses and increase your net operating income. The biggest one that you can do is ensure that you're reducing your turnover. Okay. So with turnover, there's always maintenance that comes along. And for those that have been in the investing world, you understand that there's probably some paint, some flooring damage, things like that. So the less turnover that you have, the less maintenance that occurs, keep your tenants happy and they tend to stay a lot longer. And then more importantly is your expenses continue to stay down and it keeps the valuation of your building up. So that's really a real key aspect that you want to do. So try to find ways to reduce those expenses, keep your tenants in place to the best of your ability, which is why it's really, really important as you are looking at a building, looking at the strategy. Is there an opportunity? It's equally important to also understand the type of tenant profile that your building and your building's location is going to attract. And it comes up to the next piece that I wanted to kind of highlight. And everybody's kind of heard this before, but location, location, location. It is an important piece. And there's a reason why a lot of people have heard that because it's an important aspect of this. And when it comes to the multifamily, this is a very common discussion point when they're talking about different classes of buildings and also locations. So I'm not sure if anybody's heard these before, but it really, really is important to understand the demographics of the area and the type of people that this area is going to attract. You may have the most amazing property that you've just spent a fortune doing renovations in the wrong location. And the problem is you can't change the attraction of those types of tenants. Whatever is the location dictates in regards to the tenant profile, your building is not going to change that, regardless of how amazing your building looks like. So it's important to understand the demographics of your tenant profile before you consider buying a building. Okay. So when you are going out shopping and you're looking at buildings and you're talking to your realtors, you really do want to identify areas. Number one, what's a class A area, what's a class B area, and what's a class C area. Okay. So let's just kind of maybe determine what those things are. And in addition, we'll also reference the class A buildings, class B buildings, and class C buildings. So to keep things really simple, a class A building and area, everybody knows this kind of area. It's that best area, best property, nice and shiny, really high end location where everybody wants to be, right? So you can look at like Shaughnessy in Vancouver. I'm just trying to think of some really key areas, maybe right downtown Edmonton, for example. But these are like brand new builds, best demographics. Very, very competitive in this area where people all want to hang out because there's close proximity to all these great pubs and restaurants and activities and all of these things. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about, but it is creme de la creme. This is the highest end. This is like downtown Vancouver and some of the more in English Bay Area where you can get some really nice, shiny, beautiful buildings. And at the same time, you're also attracting some of the best demographic for tenant profile as well. This can be a very competitive segment and competitive area where you're seeing insurance companies, you're seeing REITs, you're seeing pension funds investing in this area. And the reason for that is because it's so stable. That's why. Okay, you tend to get longer term tenants, stable. But the problem with class A buildings and class A areas, it becomes very difficult to kind of get some forced appreciation, believe it or not, because more often than not, the property is in amazing condition. And more often than not, they're already getting the highest type of rents that are already out there. So you don't even really need to do a lot to create that forced appreciation. It's much more expensive. But at the end of the day, this is where a lot of these bigger insurance companies, pension funds, and REITs, they love this type of segment because of its ability to be very, very stable. Okay. And then we kind of get into the class B building here and B area. More often than not, 20 to 25 years, maybe even a little bit older. They may at some point in time been original class A areas. Maybe not as shiny as it once was before, but you're also getting maybe a slightly lazy landlord that's owned this building forever when it was once a class A area or a class A area. And so in a lot of cases, it's not shiny anymore. But here's an opportunity where the area is still good. In some cases, they're just slightly outside of the class A area. And there can be opportunities to increase valuation of these properties by just doing some simple improvements and bringing it up to more of a market value. Now understand, class A, that's the top of the top. You might get class B and you may be finding an opportunity to increase rents and increase values. It can get that bump, but it will never be to that same level. So determine what these two categories are and be paying attention to this, but you should know what your classes are when you're looking at this. And then we get to our third class. And this one here, I think everybody in every city, in every market, literally around the world, kind of knows an area similar to that. Okay. So these areas be kind of 25, 50 years, maybe even older. They may be outside the downtown core, but definitely rougher part of town more often than not. The property is pretty much degraded. It's got a really bad reputation. Bed bugs, just poor quality, tenants, drugs, prostitution. I'm sure many people have got those types of cities in their market. I know downtown Vancouver, where I live in Vancouver, but really in East Hastings, that's pretty much our class C area there for sure. Okay. So rent is below market rent. You can get some really high turnover because nobody really wants to be in that particular area. Let's just say we're getting a different demographic of tenant profile, if you guys know what I'm saying, right? So it can be very different. You just got to be able to have the stomach for this. So higher expenses, definitely more capital required to improve. But here's the interesting thing. There can be some pretty decent returns if managed correctly, but it's going to be a lot of work because you are going to be dealing with different types of tenants. So there's a lot more involvement that it's going to be required when you're dealing with this type of segment of property. So just be aware. So just to be frank, if you guys are just getting started, my recommendation is try to avoid the Class C areas, Class C buildings, because that may be your first and only commercial multifamily property you'll buy, because you'll probably lose a lot of sleep. But areas like you might want to be looking for is maybe Class B areas where there's a Class C building where you can improve it. Fantastic. Or a Class B building in a Class A area. Fantastic. So those are things you want to be determining and paying close attention to. So when you're looking at different markets, understand what type of building it is. What would I rate this as a Class A, B, and C? And secondly, what would be this area be looking like in a Class A, B, and C as well? So understand these different classes. And at the end of the day, what you're trying to determine is what type of tenant profile are you trying to attract? Okay, think about it. What type of tenants do you want? And does this area and this location attract those ideal tenants? So take the time, not just to be spending a lot of it just looking at the property, take the time to understand the demographics that are happening within that area as well, because it's going to be an important aspect, because they're the ones that are going to be paying the rent. Okay. So next, financing. And this is always going to be interesting. So it is definitely very, very different than the residential world. So, and you think the banks were really tough on you when it comes to the residential, asking for all sorts of information. They're going to be equally tougher, because they're going to be asking you for all sorts of information about this property as well. They're going to want to see lease agreements. They're going to want to understand the utility costs. They're going to ask you for everything. So just be aware of this, that it's important that before you start to go down there, get your head wrapped around about some of the requirements that are going to be asked of from your mortgage broker or your lender to getting this financing done. Usually requires roughly 20 to 35% down, depending on the area, depending on the property, and it's also depending on the financing as well. Okay, more often than not, it's roughly around 25% for conventional. CMHC, you can get 20% down. And then as you get into smaller markets, more often than not, they'll be asking for a little bit of a higher down payment in the area between 30 to 35%. So be aware of that. Interest rates tend to be a little bit higher, not significantly higher, but a little bit higher. But it's not comparable to what you're seeing with your residential for sure. So right now, I think you're looking at about 3.1% for a fixed rate in the conventional world. So just be aware of that. Amortizations, depending on the type you can get, between 25 to up to 40 years commercial financing, which is fantastic. So just be aware of that too. CMHC can provide some fantastic relief, and look at some of those as options for you. We've actually got our CMHC expert going to be coming to join us in a couple of weeks, which I've already shared, and we'll be talking all about commercial financing. So if this is an area that you're seriously are considering, you definitely want to check that one out as well in a couple of weeks. Okay, so you are expected to be an expert. You are buying a business, and as a business owner, your financer is wanting to ensure that you know what you're doing. So be aware of that. So you need to be perceived as an expert. So again, present yourself that way, show your sophistication. And part of it is, if you don't know how to do this, build your financial package. Talk to your mortgage broker about how do I best present my financial package to get my financing approved the way that I wanted to. Okay. So take the time. You want to present yourself as sophisticated, because again, like I said, it's a small industry. And so you want to be perceived as an expert in your field. Okay. Next, we want to talk about some of the costs. Remember I said you need money, 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 money. And that is the absolute truth. So just some of the costs that kind of come along with this, just so everybody's aware. Just understand deposits, more often than not, if you are getting an offer accepted, they will most likely be asking for first deposit. Usually, $10, $15, $20,000 is not uncommon. Second deposit, you're lucky at $20,000. They may be asking for a little bit more. So just be prepared that you should have some of those that cash. Yes, exactly. Jake Cabral, open the wallet. You do need to open that wallet for sure. So environmental costs, you are looking at about $2,000 roughly plus, depending on the size of the building. Engineering costs, roughly another $2,500 plus. Appraisal, roughly $3,000 plus. Mortgage broker fee is 1% of the mortgage. So here's the thing. In the residential world, who pays for the mortgage broker? It's usually the lender. Okay, so usually the lender. So it'll be Scotiabank paying the mortgage broker for that client. In the multifamily world, they don't pay the mortgage broker. We do. Dun, dun, dun. But that's normally the cost is roughly around 1%. So just be aware of that. If you are using a mortgage broker, that's what the cost is. For me, I like using a mortgage broker. They're worth their weight in gold because they are my middleman between myself and also the bank. And they're going to help me present my package as effectively as they possibly can. Some people have different perspectives of that and want to avoid that cost. My opinion is they're worth their weight in gold, and make sure that I can get the best rate, the best package, and they're presenting myself appropriately to the lenders to get me the best terms that I can get. So I think they're worth every single penny, to be really honest. Legal fees, and this one was my first eye opener when I got into this thing. My first one was $12,000. My God. But legal fees can be extremely high. So be anticipating somewhere in between $6,000, $8,000, $10,000, again, depending on the size of the deal, depending on how many investor partners that you may have in this situation. So just be aware of this. Legal fees can be extraordinary. So be aware of that. CMHC costs as well, 2.5% of the mortgage. And they also do charge a CMHC setup fee as well, roughly $150 a door, because the banks like to make money, of course, right? So that's the reason why they're paying themselves such a significant amount. Okay. So be aware of that. Make sure you understand your financing terms. Make sure you understand your due diligence costs. You do need to have this capital budgeted for yourself. So when you're doing your analysis, these are just rough proximities. And here's my bit of advice. And I highly encourage you to write this one down. If you guys are taking any notes, always get quotes as you're going along in advance. So you don't want to be rushed to do these reports. Ask your lawyer how much it's going to cost. Ask your mortgage broker how much it's going to cost. Ask all these individuals as part of your investment team, your engineer, your environmental individual, your appraiser. Your appraiser is instrumental in your team. What are the costs going to be? So there are no surprises at the very, very end. So just make sure you have that visibility, especially your lawyer fees. Okay, definitely your lawyer fees. Okay, so with that being said, the key, as we're kind of slowly kind of wrapping up our presentation here, is the key to this whole thing is you do want to be an effective business manager. Okay. So things that you need to look at is building performance is extremely crucial. So you want to make sure that your net operating income is not continuing to go down. Because if your net operating income is going down, guess what your value of your building is doing? Okay. So be aware of that. So you want to take the time to make sure that you create a plan and a budget for preventive maintenance to make sure you're maintaining that valuation. So try to make renovations also pay for yourself. So as I referenced earlier, so if I'm putting $1 in, what's my return going to be back? Am I able to get further rent increases? Am I able to get further reductions of my net of my expenses? What are those key things that I can do to try to maintain my valuation, or more importantly, grow it? I think we're all trying to grow our net operating income. We all want to increase income. That's why we're doing this. Okay. So with that being said, other things you want to take a look at is if you're looking to refinance it or sell it based on the last 12, if you're going to refinance it or you're going to sell it, it's really going to be based over the last 12 months of its performance. Okay. So if all of a sudden you've got a lot of vacancies that year, that's going to impact your valuation for your refinance and your sales. So just be aware of that. Okay. So take those things into consideration. Key things that you definitely need to manage. Definitely want to watch out for vacancies. Keep those as low as you possibly can, as we talked about it before. Vacancies create that type of maintenance effect and causes issues. You want to keep them below CMHC levels to the best of your abilities. You want to try to increase your average market rents. And so whatever you can do, try to find ways to increase market rents. Something that we didn't spend too much time, because I'm running out of time, is just on the expenses side of things. And there's something called an expense ratio or operating expense ratio. And so really what you're trying to do is when you're doing your calculation of your expenses, is that making up you want to make up less than 45% of your gross income. So let me repeat that again. Your total expense, okay, based on your gross rent should be hopefully less than 45%. Okay. That's what the banks like to see and look at, so that if there are anything that's exceeding that, they may start to question what are all the holes happening within this property? Why is there such a significant expense that's going on? Is this not being managed appropriately? So just be aware of that. Okay. Improvements, just finding ways to constantly improving the units, renovations, windows, painting. Obviously, you want to be really cognizant of insurance increases. I'm not sure if a lot of people are seeing that, but there are significant increases in insurance. as of late. So be constant monitoring of the property and the performance of this, and this will ensure that your business is going to be successful. Okay. So with that being said, if there's one last piece I can kind of leave with you guys, and if this is one message that you get from this is the only message that you get from today's presentation, is just remember, multifamily is a business. This is not a single family home that you're just flipping or any of those things. There are some similarities that come along with this, but just understand you really do need to treat this as a business, because guess what? It is a business. So you really want to be very careful in that approach, making sure that you're finding ways to increase your income, finding ways to reduce it, buying right, and more importantly, managing it right. Okay. So there's lots of ways to do this and to ensure that you're going to have success. But if there's another bit of advice I can give you, take the time to educate yourself before jumping in. And with that, you guys are here today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching this video. And more importantly, is hopefully this has been able to be helpful in regards to your multifamily investing journey as well. But if you haven't, if this is not enough for you, there's lots of programs that are out there that help you educate yourself when it comes to multifamily as well. I've got one myself called Elevate Masterclass Program. I'll put a link in the description for those that maybe want to watch an information session we held a few months back about our programs. But the reality is, take the time. It can be very costly and making some very costly mistakes. But again, multifamily is not always for the faint of heart. But if you take the time to actually learn and it's done right, it can be an absolutely amazing business. Truly is. So with that, I'm going to be kind of concluding our presentation tonight. So I want to thank you guys for participating, being part of this, watching the video, and I hope that it's helped inspire you to maybe explore this as an investment strategy for yourself. So with that being said, regardless if you are watching this live or you are actually watching the recording, please don't hesitate to type questions. I saw some questions that have popped up, and I'll make sure I respond accordingly. I will respond to everybody's questions as they're watching through this. Again, last but not least, if you guys don't mind, do me a small little favor, hit that subscribe button, give us a like on our YouTube channel as well, as we continue to grow, and more importantly, is keep you guys informed of updates of new videos that are being loaded up. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us this evening, and I look forward to seeing you at our next live training session. Cheers.